wanted to share with you some thoughts that aren't obviously related to Purim, but they will be by the end, with any luck. And I want to present this thought as a kind of ongoing argument with one of my rabbis and mentors, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. At the beginning, I'm going to make it sound like I'm disagreeing with him, and I'm disagreeing with him quite starkly. By the end, you might come to see, as I think I have, that really the difference isn't so deep, and we're probably actually singing from the same song sheet, so to speak. In one of his most important books called Future Tense, I mean, all of his books are very important, but in one of his very important books called Future Tense, he tries to distinguish between cultures which are visual, right? Cultures which are all about sight, and cultures which are verbal. He talks about it being oral and aural, so oral being spoken and aural being, heard. So if you see the second source on the handout, it says the Athenians excelled at the visual arts, painting, sculpture, architecture, theatrical drama, and the spectacle of the Olympic Games. These all involved watching, seeing, being a spectator. Jews favored none of these things. Their belief in an invisible God led to a systematic devaluation of the visual. So this phrase, systematic devaluation of the visual, is a thing that when I first heard him say this, I took issue with. And when I was your age, and I was in Yeshivat HaKotel at the time, and I wrote to Rabbi Sacks as a kind of very pretentious 18-year-old. I'm sure none of you are, but I was. And I was like, Rabbi Sacks, how can you say that Judaism systematically devalues the visual? And I'll tell you why I said that in a moment. But before I do, let me give you a bit more of Rabbi Sacks's case. Right? He says, look at the very first sin that humanity commits. It's the chet of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden. It says, the Psukim say that Eve sees. So here's the third source on the handout. It says, the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good and pleasing to the eye. Right? So it's a very visual description of what's going on. She saw the fruit. It was pleasing to the eye. Says Rabbi Sacks, what neither Eve nor Adam do is to hear and to heed the commandment not to eat it. Biblical Hebrew doesn't have a verb for obeying, to obey, which is bizarre because it's a book with loads of commandments in, right? Modern Hebrew has a verb to obey because you can't have a modern army if you don't have a verb that says like obey, right? But when the Bible wants us to obey, it uses very often words to do with hearing, right? Im shamoa tishma'u el mitzvotai, if you listen to my mitzvahs, if you hear and heed. I believe the King James translation of the Bible had to create that word, to heed, right? They needed to create an English word that meant both hearing and basically obeying, right? And that's what the word to heed was created to do, to match the biblical idea. So what Rabbi Sacks is saying is Adam and Eve were led astray by their eyes, and they didn't listen to the commandments, right? So, and you'll all know the third paragraph of the Shema, right? It says, "V'lo tatu acharei levavechem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem." You shouldn't follow after your heart or lust after your eyes, which would lead you astray. Says Rabbi Sacks, the story of the first sin is about the tension between a visual culture and an oral-aural one. Next, he says, in the next handout, although it's actually earlier in the book, he says, to this day, in English, almost all our words for understanding or intellect are governed by the metaphor of sight. We speak of insight, hindsight, foresight, vision and imagination. We speak of people being perceptive and of making an observation. We say, it appears that. When we understand something, we say, I see. The Babylonian Talmud, by contrast, consistently uses the metaphor of hearing. When a proof is about to be brought, it says, Tashma, come and hear. When it speaks of inference, it says, Shma mina, you can hear from this. When someone disagrees with a proposition, it says, Lo shmi'alei, he couldn't hear it. When it draws an inference, it says mashma, which means from this it can be heard. The Rambam calls the entire oral tradition mepi hashmua, from the mouth of that which was heard. Says Rabbi Sachs, in Western culture, understanding is a form of seeing. In Judaism, it's a form of listening. Okay, so if you were the pretentious 18-year-old who's really interested in visual art, okay, and you read this, on what grounds might you try and disagree with Rabbi Sachs? Do you have any counterexamples where Judaism doesn't seem to devalue the visual? Yeah. The Beit HaMikdash, right? What are you going to say about it? It's supposed to be beautiful, right?
On top of that, we have a mitzvah of Re'iyah, where the entire inyan of the mitzvah is to be seen.
Is to be seen on Har HaBayit, absolutely. Right? So there's a type of seeing we are commanded to be seen. There are so many psukim are dedicated to the intricate design of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, right? And B'Tzalel and the chokhmah that he was given, and it seems like that's elevated. It seems like that's a good thing. And it's true that the Bavli says Tashma, come listen, but what does the Yerushalmi say? Tachazi, come and see. Right? Exactly the same idiom. He was just selective with his choices, right? And it's not true that in English all of our metaphors for understanding are based on vision and none are on hearing. You can say, I hear where you're coming from, right? Which means I understand. So in English there are aural metaphors for understanding, and in Hebrew there are visual metaphors for understanding. Look at the very last source on the sheet. Ta'amu ura'u ki tov Hashem ashrei hagever yechasu bo. Taste and see how good the Lord is. Right? There's a type of seeing we're being invited to engage in. So I felt quite stridently that Rabbi Sachs had kind of he'd over-egged this distinction. To be fair to him, he admits to doing this in another really important book, The Great Partnership. He admits to the fact that sometimes when you're teaching, you make a stark distinction, and you make it slightly more stark than it really is, in order to kind of communicate the point. But actually, when you look with a finer tooth comb, you'll find that, okay, it's not quite as stark as that, but it's still a useful distinction, okay? Still a rule of thumb. But I think we can do better than that, okay? What's your name? Micha talks about the mitzvah of Re'iyah. It's interesting, right? So the fifth source on the handout is from Parshat Re'eh, right? By the way, Re'eh, Asher anochi noten lifnechem hayom, et habracha v'et haklala, right? See that today I give you a bracha and a klala. That seems like a counterexample to Rabbi Sachs. So see, right? See, Parshat Re'eh, see that I'm giving you a bracha and klala. But you know what Rabbi Sachs says to that? What's the next verse? The bracha is im tishmoa tishmu, like if you listen, right? So actually, what Moshe is playing with us is saying, see how important it is to listen, right? But so that's not necessarily the best counterexample. But at the end of Parshat Re'eh, there's this mitzvah of Re'iyah, which says, Shalosh pa'amim b'shana yeira'eh kol zuchuracha p'nei Hashem Elokecha b'makom hashevcha b'chag hamatzot v'chag hashavuot v'chag Sukkot v'lo yeira'eh et p'nei Hashem reikam. That the male folk are commanded to be seen on the place that will be chosen, the makom, Har HaBayit, and you're not to be seen empty-handed. Okay, where does Har HaMoriah get its name from? Who named it that? Abraham, right, after the Akedah, yeah? Now, when he names it Har HaMoriah, he says Hashem Yeira'eh, he says, the psukim over there are confusing because in one place he says, this is the place where Hashem will be seen, right? Hashem will be seen. But then, no, Hashem will see, Hashem Yir'eh, right? He calls it, this is the place where Hashem will see. But then after he names it Har HaMoriah, the verse says, as it is to this day, the place where God is seen, right? Hashem Yir'eh. So the question is Har HaBayit the place where God will see, or is it the place where God will be seen? I'll come back to that question momentarily. there's a lovely midrash. Abraham wakes up, well, no, before he goes to bed, he has this vision that he needs to bring Yitzchak as an olah in the place that Hashem will show him. And he wakes up early in the morning and he goes off. But if you follow the psukim over there, Hashem never tells Abraham, oh, you've reached the place. Abraham's just supposed to somehow know, right? It says that he saw the place from far off, right? Abraham, it says, what the psukim? I thought I had it on the, but it says he saw the place from rachok, right? I can't remember. It's v'yara makom mirachok, yeah. Ete makom mirachok. He saw the place from a distance. And the rabbis, thank you, Shkoyach. The rabbis, when they address this story in the midrash, they're perplexed as we are. What did he see? What made this mountain different from any of the other kind of hilltops around, right? There's Har Tzion, there's Har Zaitim. There are all sorts of little hilltops around here. Why was that hilltop special? What did he see? So the Midrash says, Amar li Yitzchak, B'ni. Avraham said to Yitzchak, my son, Ro'eh ata ma she'ani ro'eh. Do you see what I see? Amar lo, hein. Yitzchak says, yeah, I see it. Amar lishnei na'arav. He says to his two lads who are with him, the psukim make it clear that when Avraham went up to Har Moriah, he took his donkeys and he also took his two young men with him. V'yachavosh et chamarav v'yikach et shnei na'arav ito v'yet Yitzchak. So he had a traveling party. The tradition says that it's Yishmael and Eliezer. We don't know who they are. They were just two young men who were in the traveling party with him. He says to them, Ro'im atem ma shani ro'eh? Do you guys see what I see? Amulo, lav. They said, no, we don't see it. Amar, hoil v'chamor eino ro'eh v'atem ein atem ro'im. Since the donkey doesn't see and you guys don't see, shvu lachem po im hachamor. You guys stay here with the chamor. We'll come back to you later. If this is a midrash that is addressing, at least partially, the question I raised was, what did Abraham see? Right? What does the midrash frustratingly not tell us? What it was they saw, right? So it's like a really frustrating midrash. Do you see it, Yitzchak? Yeah, I see it. Do you guys see it? No, we don't see it. And I'm almost on the side of the Shnei Na'arav. Because you haven't told me, was there some neon sign flashing that says bring your olot here, or something? What was there? And the Midrash knows that that's our question, and it's kind of tantalizing. It teases us by raising the question, but not supplying an answer. What I want to suggest, and I'm going to develop some philosophical tools with you to help make this suggestion a little bit more meaty, is that there are different types of seeing. And what Avraham and Yitzchak saw wasn't something material at all. It wasn't like they just saw another mountaintop. They saw something like a potential. They saw, this could be a place where heaven and earth meet. This could be a place where people direct their prayers, through which people direct their prayers to heaven. They saw not what was there, but they saw what could be there. The question is that a type of seeing at all? In what sense are the eyes involved? Okay, so in cognitive science, there's a big debate about the following thing. It's basically called format. Okay, cognitive scientists recognize that our brain represents the world around it in at least two formats, okay? It's basically like the language in which your brain is wired, okay? There are two formats. One format is pictorial. They sometimes call it iconic, they sometimes call it pictorial, okay? Think of your visual field, right? Your visual field's just floods your brain with images, right? Colors, shapes, okay? That format of information is pictorial. The other format in which your brain thinks or represents the world is more linguistic. Okay? So your brain gives labels to things. So I call this a sheet of paper. I call this a stender. And though that's English or Yiddish, also, so to speak, in the language of my brain, okay, there is a linguistic type of format. Okay, two formats, pictorial and linguistic. Everyone with me? Okay? And the debate among the cognitive scientists are manifold. One debate is, well, which of these formats is more basic? Okay? There are people on the language side that say, actually, all of the pictures and stuff, it's very nice, but the primary language, the primary format of the brain is linguistic. There's the other side that says, no, that's not true. The linguistic comes much later. The primary format of the human brain is pictorial. And there are those who say both. One thing you might try and do with this distinction is to try to explain what is the difference between perception and cognition. Okay? Perception, you think, is what you do with your eyes. Okay? Or your ears. But when I perceive the room, it seems like it's all pictorial. But when I cognize the room, when I start to think about what I'm seeing, I'm using language. So one school of thought says, that's the difference between perception and cognition. Format. I happen to think that's wrong, because I believe in a doctrine called, and this is the catchy catchphrase for today's session. If you learn nothing else, you'll learn this. It's called the cognitive penetration of the perceptual, right? I believe there's something called the cognitive penetration of the perceptual. What does that mean? It means that the language that you speak and the words that you have and your conceptual vocabulary actually invade your perceptual field. They actually help to shape what you're seeing. A nice example of this was offered by Wittgenstein, and it's on the second side of your handout. There's a picture. The question is whether you're looking at a duck or a rabbit. Okay? Those of you who are familiar with this, I'm sorry, because it's obvious, but those of you, for those of you who aren't, let me explain. You can look at this image, and you can look at that as a beak of a duck, and that's its eye, and it's looking this way. Everyone see a duck? Okay, but you could also look at it as a rabbit. These are the two ears. Its eye's facing that way. It's got a little nose there, and you can see it as a rabbit. Got it? The thought is, you can't see it as a duck and a rabbit simultaneously. You can see it as a duck, or you can see it as a rabbit, and you can flip between them. What's more, I would argue that if none of us had ever seen a duck, but we had seen rabbits, we'd see this as a rabbit and not as a duck. It's only because you have the concept, duck, right, that you're able to see it as a duck. It's only because you have the concept. Here's an example from a philosopher, Fred Dretsky, who was driving down the road in Texas, and an armadillo crossed the road. And he'd never seen an armadillo before, and he didn't know what it was. So there's a sense in which he definitely saw an animal crossing the road. But the next time, once he knew what armadillos were, he didn't just see an animal crossing the road, he saw that it was an armadillo. And I want to say that that's a type of seeing. Okay? The actual experience of seeing it is different. When he saw it without the concept, it was like, oh, what's that? Right? When he sees it and he knows what it is, he sees, oh, I see that it's an armadillo. And I want to say that actually shapes the visual experience. Another reason to think I'm right, I mean, I hate to bang on and sound bombastic, but another reason to think I'm right is this, right? Actually, I said that when you look out at the room, you see pictures, but it's not so simple. You don't just see a wash of color. It doesn't come to you as a wash of color. It comes to you broken up into objects. I see people sitting in chairs, right? And I think the only reason I see people sitting in chairs is because I have the concepts of people and chairs and sitting and whatever. If I didn't have those concepts, maybe if I was a newborn baby, I would just see a wash of color. and I wouldn't be able to distinguish one patch from another. So I want to argue that my concepts are shaping what I see. Okay. Next source I want to share with you, I have no clue how much time I'm taking of all of you. The next source I want to share with you is from Shir HaShirim. Okay. Hinach yafa rayati, hinach yafa inayich, yoni mi ba'ad letzamatech, sa'arech ke'edem ha'izim, shegashalu me'har Gilad. How beautiful you are, my love. How beautiful. Your eyes like doves seen through tresses. So far, so romantic, right? How beautiful you are, my love. Your eyes look like doves. And you think of doves. Doves have I suppose they could have big eyes themselves, and we think of like flying, and it's all pretty and light. Your hair like a flock of goats flowing down Mount Gilad. Now the thing is, I get it. From a distance, if you see a flock of goats going down a mountain, it's like almost liquid. It's flowing. But if you look at a goat close up, they are ugly and scraggly, okay? And the last thing you want to compare your lover's hair is to a goat. Just trust me, when you're reaching for compliments and you're describing your lover's hair, don't go for goat. Okay, don't go for goat. But Shlomo HaMelech goes for goat. Next it says, your teeth are like a flock of sheep. Well, that's nice because sheep are white and they're well ordered. You'll see that's part of the metaphor later on. There's not one missing. But sheep are furry. Furry teeth are not good. There are people with furry teeth, and they're not attractive, I'm sorry to say. If you have furry teeth, go to a hygienist. It carries on like this. It says, your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Okay, that's nice. Your speech is fair. That's nice. Your forehead's like a pomegranate. Well, pomegranates are greasy and lumpy. And greasy and lumpy. You could probably buy ointment for that peculiar skin condition if your skin is as greasy and shiny as a pomegranate. Do not, this is just, dating advice, when the time comes, don't go to the pomegranate metaphor when describing your beloved's forehead. But he does, okay? And then your neck is like the Tower of David. She must be a rugby player. Okay, very nice. When Rabbi Sachs actually has a Perush on Shir HaShirim. He doesn't have a Perush on many books of the Bible, but because he wrote a Perush to all the Machzorim, and we read Shir HaShirim on Pesach, in the Pesach Machzor, he has a translation and commentary. The translation is actually by his niece, Jessica Sachs, but the commentary was by him. And he says this: the similes of this chapter, hair like a flock of goats, teeth like sheep, neck like a tower, and so on, are notoriously difficult to understand. But we shouldn't assume that the poet is pointing to visual similarities. So what Rabbi Sachs is saying is, don't think that Shlomo HaMelech is saying that X looks like Y. When he says your eyes are like doves, your hair are like a goat's, your forehead's like a pomegranate, don't think he's saying X looks like Y. That would be offensive, right? Your teeth look like sheep, right? That's what you need to go to see the hygienist for. He's not saying that, okay? It's not visual, says Rabbi Sachs. So what is going on? Well, Rabbi Sachs would say what's going on is something conceptual. It's something like what your hair does reminds me of what goats do. It flows. It's not that, no, I didn't say you look like a goat. I promise you, it's not looking like, okay? Something your hair does reminds me of something goats do. Something your eyes do remind me of something doves do, and so on and so forth. Some property of your teeth, their whiteness and their orderliness, remind me of the whiteness and orderliness of a sheep. But I'm not saying your teeth look like sheep, okay? Fine. But I believe in the cognitive penetration of perception. So I actually think that these metaphors can shape the way you see your beloved. Let's go with the pomegranate one deeper for a moment, okay? A pomegranate is almost bursting with what? Seeds, okay? It's like full to the brim with seeds. You can experience another person as a source of creativity, okay? I don't know you guys, so I just see faces, people. But I want to say that if I knew your characters better, that might shape the way I actually experience the process of seeing you. If I know that you're inquisitive, then I might see inquisitivity in your face. If I experience my wife as a source of incredible insight, always overflowing, bubbling with ideas, then the very experience of beholding her, of seeing her, might be shaped by that. Are you with me? That's true if you believe in this thing called the cognitive penetration of perception. So I want to say that it's not quite true that these metaphors are not visual. The more accurate thing to say is they're not pictorial. They're linguistic or conceptual. But concepts can shape seeing, so it can still be visual. There are two types of vision. There's vision that is more pictorial, and there's vision where the pictures are somehow subservient to concepts, where the pictures are shaped by concepts. I want to go so far as to say that Judaism doesn't systematically devalue the visual, it systematically devalues the pictorial and says that the pictorial should always be subservient to concepts. It's not that you shouldn't see stuff, but you should look at the world through Jewish eyes and allow the concepts of Judaism to shape the very experience of seeing things around you. That's what's going on with Avraham and Yitzchak. When they see Har HaBayit, the visual experience of seeing a dusty mountain in the Judean hills is transformed for them because they experience that sight as the sight of a potential meeting between God and humanity. And I want to say that is visual. It's a type of seeing. It's a seeing that is subservient to language and concepts. And I want to do just a couple more things before I finish. One is to explain why I don't think I'm really disagreeing too profoundly with Rabbi Sachs. And then the other is to speak a little bit about Purim, just to give you a hint of a tint of a direction to how all of this relates to Purim. Rabbi Sachs's point is that because we believe in an invisible God, we weren't interested in drawing him, right? Because that would be a waste of time. He doesn't have a shape. He doesn't have a form. And the best that we could do to reach out to an invisible God is to use language. Rabbi Sachs, in a very beautiful passage in future tense, describes language as the redemption of solitude. You're all alone if it weren't for language, okay? Language is what allows you to reach out to another. All the more so when that other is invisible, okay? So language is key for us. Lo tatu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher tem zonim achareihem. Is there are some things in this world which are pleasing to the eye, and that's all there is to it. They're just pleasing to the eye. And Judaism isn't interested in that stuff. That stuff can lead you astray. But it's interesting that in that pasuk, it starts with your heart and then goes on to your eyes. Perhaps if your heart's in the right place, then your eyes are going to be transformed. If you don't follow after the lustfulness of your heart, but instead you've subjugated your heart to the dictates of your mind, to the conceptual landscape of Judaism, perhaps then your eyes won't be dangerous at all. On the contrary, you'll be seeing through the prism of Jewish language, of Jewish ideas. I think what we see in Shir HaShirim is the difference between merely visual similarities and what I call discursive associations, right? It's not that your hair looks like goats, but there's some sort of chain of associations of concepts that leads me from the goats to your hair and back again. I think when we talk about beauty in Judaism, it's always discursive in this way. I think a nice example is in the famous Gemara in Menachot that's quoted by so many people for so many different reasons. But I think this is a somewhat new usage of this well-worn Gemara. It says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, B'sha'a she'ala Moshe l'marom, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to receive the Torah, Matza'ola Kadosh Baruch Hu sheyoshev v'koshek tarim la'otiyot. He saw that Hashem was sitting and affixing crowns to the letters. As you know, Torah calligraphy has little crowns on it. Amar lefanav, he said before him, Ribono shel olam, mi ma'akev al yadcha? Who's holding you back? Why are you taking so much time over this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Don't you know I've got a raving mob of Jews down at the bottom of the mountain? We all know what's going to happen, right? Cheta Egel. And Moshe is in a rush to get back down. What's keeping you, God? And God's response is, Amalo, Adam echad yesh shatid liot. There is a person who will one day be. Besof Kamad Dorot, after many years. V'Akiva ben Yosef Shmo. His name is Akiva ben Yosef. Shatid lidrosh al kol kotz v'kotz tilin shel halachot. He is going to derive mountains of halachot from every single little crown that I'm attaching. Now, the Rosh Hashiva will correct me if I'm wrong, but even though we're very precise in the halachot of Torah calligraphy, such that even if one letter is malformed, one letter isn't properly written, or one letter is missing, the entire Torah scroll is rendered pasul. Nonetheless, the ketarim, if a crown falls off, it's not me'akev. I think that's correct, right? Yeah. We're basically dealing, whether officially or unofficially, in the realm of Hidra Mitzvah, the idea that we should make our mitzvot more beautiful. So the crowns are there for beauty. But says this Gemara, the beauty of Jewish beauty is always discursive. It's not, look how pretty that is to the eye, and that's where it stops. Rabbi Akiva was able to make inferences from the crowns. Something about their beauty, something about their location, something about the way they were related to one another, something about the way that seeing them struck him, allowed him to make inferences with his brain. So the beauty here isn't purely visual. It's some sort of kind of cognitive, perceptual kind of, there's a give and a take between both systems, between both formats, to use the language of the cognitive scientist. I think in that famous Gemara, where Rabbi Meir says, what's so special about tchelet, that it should be the color. And it says, well, you'll look at it and you'll think of the color of the sea, and you'll think of the color of the sky, and then you'll think of the color of the sapphire stone that's under the footstool of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, you could say that's a counterexample to me, that's all visual, blue, blue, blue. But no, I think what Rabbi Meir is saying is, when you look at your tzitzit, or ritemotam, right? When you look at your tzitzit, will you see the majesty? Right? Ve'enenu tirena et malchutecha, right? Our eyes will see your majesty. What does it mean for eyes to see majesty? Majesty isn't a physical, material thing, but we describe it as a visual experience. And I think Rabbi Meir is saying there's a way of looking at your tzitzit and seeing in them majesty. Ta'amu uru'u ki tov Hashem asher agev yechasu bo. All I'm saying is that once you do put language in charge, vision isn't so bad. Rabbi Sachs puts it starkly. He says there's the language cultures and the visual cultures. We're on the side of language. I'm making a slightly more subtle distinction that I don't think Rabbi Sachs would disagree with necessarily, which is that actually there are two types of visual. There's the visual which is subjugated to language, and there's the visual which goes just after the eye, what's pleasing to the eye. And the first type of visual is kosher. In fact, it's more than kosher. It's good. One reason for thinking that Rabbi Sachs would have appreciated this potentially is the following thought. He has an aphorism, a saying, that comes up twice in The Great Partnership. And it's very beautifully put. He says, science breaks things apart to see how they work. Religion puts things together to see what they mean. And it's an aphorism. It's beautiful. It's poetry. But when you really think about it, I think he's saying something very, very profound. There's something in the history of analytical philosophy called the paradox of analysis. The paradox of analysis is this. If you take something complex and you break it up into its parts, right, you learn something about it. So I take the clock and I break it apart into all the cogs and whatever. But one thing you lose by breaking it up, which is the clock you started with, right? The whole, the unity of the whole, okay? Bertrand Russell was worried by this. He said, like, you take a fact, like the cup is on the, whatever this is called, the bimmer. The cup is on the bimmer, okay? He wouldn't have used that language, but he would have said desk or something, right? But the cup is on the bimmer, okay? That's a fact. Says Rabbi Bertrand, that fact has three constituents. It has the cup, it has the bimmer, and it has the relation of the cup being on the bimmer. So he's analysed the fact into three constituents. But the fact has something that the list doesn't have. It has a unity, okay? And he was like, oh, what do we do? So here's maybe a better analysis. The fact is made up of the cup, the bimmer, the relation of being on, and metaphysical glue. Because you need the metaphysical glue to stick the three parts together. But then you've just got a list of four things, right? The cup, the bimmer, the relation of being on, and metaphysical glue. That's just a list. That doesn't have the unity that the fact has. Oh, I know what we'll do. I'll posit something else called metaphysical superglue, which sticks the glue to the relation to the... But this is called an infinite regress. It's known as Bradley's regress, if you want to know for some reason. Now you know. That's Bradley's regress. And Russell's solution to Bradley's regress isn't really a solution at all. He just puts his hands up and says, there's no way of getting around this. He says, analysis gives you the truth, nothing but the truth, but never the whole truth. Analysis never gives you the whole truth. There's always something lost in analysis. When you break apart a person into its constituent parts, all we seem to be is a co-location of cells. And that's not false, right? That's an accurate analysis. But my goodness, something's been lost, right? Personhood. Rabbi Sachs was convinced that personhood is one of the things that gets lost on analysis, okay? It's not that it doesn't exist, but the scientist will never find it under a microscope because it's like the unity of a fact. It's a thing which is there, which is real, but gets lost on analysis. So if science is about breaking the world into bits to see how it works, religion is about putting things back together in the hope of seeing the stuff that science is always going to miss. The unities. But I want to suggest that and this is where I'm adding, that this requires a certain type of seeing. When Richard Dawkins, the new atheist, looks out at the world and he sees another person, he doesn't see anything but a co-location of cells. That's what he sees. Poor man, right? When I see a person walking around the street, if I'm tuned in, I see Tzelem Elokim, right? I see something, I see Kvod Adam. I see something so remarkable that Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says, you know, the Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah, when it says Kadoshim to you, the rabbis say, how Kadosh? Even as Kadosh as God? No, Talmud Loma ki Kadosh ani. Talmud Loma that God is more Kadosh. And Chaim Shmulevitz says, what's the Havamina? The Havamina of the Midrash is that we are as holy as God. How could you have such a Havamina? You could have such a Havamina if when you see a human being, you're struck by Tzelem Elokim. You're struck by Kvod Adam. And Purim, because it's all about masks, it's all about things which are hidden. You can read the story of Purim and never mention the word God, because the Megillah doesn't mention the word God. You can read the story as a geopolitical intrigue, and that's it. But the rabbis are inviting you to see the story with different eyes, to see in the story the hand of Hashem. And like I say, you know, this is perhaps a slight disagreement with Rabbi Sachs, perhaps it's a superficial disagreement, but I want to say this is a type of seeing. And indeed, at Har HaBayit, God revealed to us his word, and Moshe is very, very adamant that we didn't see anything. You didn't see a tmunah, you didn't see a shape. But what we do know from Sefer Shemot is v'chol ha'am ra'im et hakolot. All of the nation saw the voices. Perhaps what this means, some people think it's a type of synesthesia, where you see things, you know, some people have weird visual experiences when they hear certain words or when they count numbers. Some people think this is a type of synesthesia. I want to suggest a kind of midrashic reading of that verse, which is no. What they learned to do at Har Sinai, was to see the world through the voices, was to allow their visual apparatus to be so saturated by Jewish concepts that when they looked around the world, they saw the world of Torah. Like when the halachic man in Rav Soloveitchik's masterpiece sees the sunset, he experiences it as being called to mincha. When he sees a river flowing, he experiences it as a mikveh. Right? It's not, oh, I see water and then I make an inference, there must be 60 seah there, so it's a kosher. No, he sees it as a mikveh. It's not an inference, it's a type of seeing. And I think that in a sense, that's what the rabbis are inviting us to do in Chag HaPurim, when we disguise ourselves visually. We invite each other to look with a deeper, more spiritual eye. Shkoyach, that's all I had to say.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions. Anyone ask a question?
Sure.
Wondering, what do you think that makes it unique about Judaism? Because I would argue all religious art and architecture, and essentially trying to make that inference of you go into a chapel and you are struck by your great inferiority to this massive building.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I don't think that Judaism has to be unique in every respect as a religion, right? I think that there are going to be differences between Jewish art and Christian art because we believe that God never took a physical form, okay? They believe otherwise, okay? That is going to affect, I think, the landscape of the artistic imagination. If for you, chas v'chalila, and per impossible, God were a being of flesh and blood, then that's going to change the landscape of the artistic imagination. For us, God is, beyond physical form, so nothing could ever look like him. And therefore, I think the Jewish artist has a tougher time than let's say, the Christian artist. In that respect, maybe Jewish art is closer to Islamic art. but Islamic art has a massive taboo on any forms or shapes at all, other than calligraphy, other than just writing, right? And I think that maybe Judaism is able to strike a balance, and you see that with the Techelet, you see that with Rabbi Akiva and the Ketarim on the letters. There's a type of beauty that Judaism is gunning for, but it's a beauty that will lead the intelligent, will lead the Jewishly literate to see the world through the prism of Torah concepts. And whether that makes Jewish art unique among the religions isn't my concern. I think there's something marvelous about you have a tzedakah box and it's covered in silver. What does that mean? That means you should experience giving to tzedakah something majestic rather than al nebuch, some poor guy, right? I think that we need to be careful with visual art because of what Rabbi Sachs says, which is there are some things which are pleasing to the eye, merely to the eye, and they can lead you astray. That's what happened with Chava and Gan Eden. So there's definitely something to be careful about. But on the other hand, what we've seen is there's lots of types of seeing that Judaism is interested in. Oh, I didn't come back to the thing about being seen on the mountaintop, right? And this is like Hasidic drush gone, on steroids. But I like it. I think what's happening is, if you want to see God, see the Jewish people together, right? And that's it. Hashem yira'eh, right? Hashem will see. Hashem yira'eh. Hashem will be seen. When will he be seen? Kol zechurecha, shalosh pa'amim b'shana yira'eh kol zechurecha. When all of your male folk are seen. You could look at Har HaBayit with all the Jews on it and say, that's a big crowd. Or you could look at it and see Kvod Hashem, right? And see the realization of the word of Hashem that we were supposed to come here 3 times a year. Those are 2 very different visual experiences. So on the one hand, I want to push against this idea that vision is always bad. On the other hand, we do have to be aware of the dangers, right? And I would argue that Christian art, for all sorts of reasons, isn't aware of those dangers. And indeed, they go so far as to paint, to paint pictures way past the line, even trying to depict HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rahman al-Islam. Yes?
We have this concept in Chassidus of machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about dibur and ma'aseh, and I'm wondering if you think we could build, either in retrospect, an art history of Judaism or an art language in the present and future of Judaism that also is subservient to ma'aseh.
Yeah. So I think there are some Jewish artists who are really interested in this sort of thing, but that's the sort of thing I'm trying to inspire. I'm not sure we could do it as art history, although I do think there are hints in the works of Agadah. There are hints about a type of seeing, a type of beauty. So if you were to, I think it'd be really cool to do an in-depth study of Hidur Mitzvah and how it works and what it's supposed to do, what its function is. But I think certainly going forward, Jewish artists should be encouraged to inspire people to see the world differently. Right? It's not just, that's a nice painting, but after I've seen that painting, am I going to turn around and see the world differently? Right? And if so, how so? And if so, is it going to be for the good or is it going to be, God forbid, for the bad? Yeah.
Okay, I think we do one last question.
Okay. Yes, hello.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you.
You were talking a lot about the distinctions between the mere visual stimulus of what is vision versus how we can apply our conceptions and preceptions onto it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, after somebody has acquired a degree of language acquisition and has ideas of concepts and says this is a table and not, it's not a sole block of color, how could you kind of undo that?
That's really
how
good.
Can we really see the world without
Yeah.
their perceptions placed upon
I think it's really, really hard. I think, we're bombarded right now with so many more images than humanity was ever bombarded with because of our screens. And they encode subtly all sorts of messages, right? So think about the body image, especially of girls, but of boys too, right? The messages we get about body image. How do you unlearn that stuff, right? And you're quite right. I have a concept table. I'm going to see it as a table, and I'm never going to unsee that, right? I think this should be both. First of all, there should be a cautionary tale here. You should be very careful what you look at, and careful also what thoughts you expose yourself to, because you can't unlearn things that have been learned. You can't unsee things that have been seen. But on the other hand, I would say that you can layer things with significance, right? So, like, I see a pair of silver candlesticks. I see silver. I see candlesticks. I see artistry. But then, if you tell me a story about them, you tell me that, like, they were smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto and were buried for many years, and then the grandchild recovered them. I'm going to experience them differently too. I don't have to delete the layers. It's not like I'm not going to see the silver and I'm not going to see the artistry. So you can layer things, right? There's this remarkable concept in halakha, which is that the uman is kona b'sheva chakli. So if I give some wood to you, it's my wood, mine, and I give it to you to make it into a table, right? When I pay you, according to most of the Rishonim, what I'm doing is I have to buy you out of the table. What do you mean? It was my wood. But the fact that you mixed your labor with it, you put something of yourself into it, right? And therefore, you've now become a partner in this object. You own something of it. You own the beautification, right? So I have to pay you not just for your labor, but I have to pay you to buy you out of your share of the table that you've made for me. When you look at things, are you aware of all the work that's been put into them, right? And I want to say that can be a visual experience to see things that way. We don't, right? Until now, I haven't thought about the factory that produced these cups, or the trees that were cut down to create them, But I think you can learn to become sensitive, ad kadei kach, so much so that you're really struck by these things when you see them, right? So, A, you probably can't undo the conceptual learning you've already done. B, therefore, be careful what you expose yourself to, the sorts of sights, sounds, and thoughts you expose yourself to. B, C, I can count, even in Latin letters. C, just because you've learnt stuff that you're never going to unlearn doesn't mean you can't add layers on top of it. Shkoyach.
Okay, thank you
Thank
to
you.
Dr. Lebens for what